Hello, I'm Casey Aiken, and this is 21 This Week. Coming up next, another report has Montgomery County losing small businesses. Should we be worried? Councilman Tom Hucker wants landlords to install air conditioning in all rental dwellings. What impact will this have on the environment? Why is the county executive unable to fill key top-level positions, including chief of police? And have you ever heard of the Maryland 400, the brave band of soldiers who saved the American Revolution before it got started? Stay tuned. Our panel of insiders will give you the story behind the story. We're joined by the former Montgomery County Council member, Mike Knapp, Secretary of the Maryland Republican Central Committee, Mark Uncapher, Republican National Committeewoman for Maryland, Nicolee Ambrose, and education activist, Cynthia Rubenstein. Stay tuned for these stories and more on the next 21 This Week. Just a week after CNBC issued its list of best states for business, ranking Maryland a dismal 41st and neighboring Virginia number 1, data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics show that Montgomery County in 2018 had a sluggish employment growth and had a net loss in businesses. Mark, it's hard not to take notice when employment in Loudoun County grows by 2.8%, Fairfax by 1.8%, and even Arlington grew by 1%. Here in Montgomery County, we grew by barely 0.5%. How can we reverse this trend?
I think we got to start by acknowledging the fact that this isn't a, quote, perception issue. It's frequently described as the perception of Montgomery County not being business friendly, and acknowledge the fact that it is not business friendly, and avoid the excuses that we have about the Washington area, because after all, we're getting beaten by counties that are in the same metropolitan area.
Well, it was interesting, council member at large, Hans Reimer, also came out and said the exact same thing. We've got to recognize that we have an issue with economic growth. We have to do something about it. It was nice to see. Mike, welcome back to the show.
Thanks.
During your 8 years on the county council, I'm sure you and your colleagues addressed this issue. If anything, the problem has accelerated since you left. What needs to be changed to change the dynamics and the approach that Montgomery County is taking towards economic development?
Well, one of the first things we've got to be able to do is actually have something that looks like a shared vision. Right now we have an economic development corporation that kind of has a vision, but they're leaderless now. They're looking for a new head for that organization. We have the county executive that kind of has a vision. We have part of the county council that kind of has a vision. And so if you actually came out there and said, what are we trying to achieve? There's not even any unanimity as to what that is. And so I think that's first and foremost is what are we trying to get to and what does economic growth in Montgomery County look like?
But are any of the council members really thinking about economic growth? Aren't they concentrating on other issues instead? They
often are, and as we know, Montgomery County tends to have this age-old debate of growth versus no growth. And as soon as you say you want to talk about economic development, then a lot of folks who are supporting many of the council members will say, we don't really need any more growth. And I think to Mark's point, the notion of actually recognizing that you can't have a robust economy and have the things we want in Montgomery County without a strong economy. We've got to actually begin to address that issue. It's not a growth, no growth issue. It's can we pay for the things that we want in the county in the first place.
So Cynthia, there are those that say that Montgomery County spends too much time on low-hanging political fruit like social issues and not addressing economic development. And certainly they hate talking about transportation infrastructure other than mass transit. So is that a fair criticism?
I think one of the issues with county council members is that for many of them, it's their bailiwick to work on social issues and to work on public transit issues. Their familiarity and comfort with development, economic development, land use, and transportation are much less. And we don't have much representation on the county council in order to lead, understand, and press.
Well, but I want to pick up on Mike's point about vision. The problem is the master plan that was done in the late 1960s had a vision for how the county was going to grow, and it was based on economic data and projections. This county council doesn't have a vision for the future. They aren't looking outward as to what the county is going to be like 40, 20, 30 years from now? That's a huge problem. How do you change that?
Well, as Mike mentioned, every time you talk about growth, and growth sounds good until you start talking about land use, and you start talking about the ag reserve, and you start talking about changing density, and you start talking about developers. And then suddenly elected officials get very shy.
Yeah, Mark?
One of the problems we have here is that the default setting is that Montgomery County becomes a bedroom community to jobs that are located either in Virginia or District of Columbia. And that exacerbates our transportation problem because we have the American Legion Bridge alone. So it's really important to have this balanced growth of jobs in Montgomery County, or else we're going to continue to have a transportation nightmare.
We also have to look at land use issues and also recognize that land use changes over time. This is no longer an agricultural community. The ag reserve sounds wonderful, but the reality is when those farms are chopped up, they're chopped up into 5-acre farmettes and mansions. And we have a desperate need for low-income housing and affordable housing.
We also have a need in a certain section of the eastern county, especially at the route like the White Oak area, where there is a ton of housing but very poor.
Well, there's no transportation.
Correct, and
There's
so
no
the
mass
transportation has
There's
to go
there are
has to go
poor
hand in
roadways.
hand. So they have not figured out how to put more jobs and economic development where all this housing
I'm going
is
to go
in
to
East County.
Nicolee now because we're going to depend on the state to fix this problem. Because in Maryland, Nicolee, overall we added 51,000 jobs in the state last year. Unemployment dropped to 3.9%. But Montgomery County is the engine for the state of Maryland. Is your governor, Governor Hogan, doing enough to develop Montgomery County and support its development?
So our governor has done a brilliant job, and I'd say that's a leading reason why he was reelected, of creating a great economic climate
For the
throughout the
state.
state of Maryland.
For the state.
The
What's he
question
doing
is,
here?
the problem is Montgomery County is not taking advantage of it, and it is being held hostage by your one-party rule county council, who's voting for radical things that scare away not only businesses, but the people who need the jobs that those businesses offer. So I would suggest if you look at the map of the region of who is benefiting the least from this economic boon, it is blue counties that are run by one party. There's no transparency in the government. And your only problem is politics.
That's easy to say, but honestly, the governor has a responsibility to the entire state.
And he's done it.
And
his job is not to hire people himself. His job is to create the climate so businesses want to locate here. And he has done that. It is Montgomery County's
What do you think about Nicolee's response here that Larry Hogan has done everything possible that he could do?
Well, Amazon's in Crystal City, and they're not in Maryland. So I think clearly we tried to work together as a state to pull pieces together to get an organization like Amazon to locate here, and it didn't happen. And so as good as we may be doing things here, collectively, it's still more attractive to go someplace else.
But the location they were looking at in Maryland was Montgomery County because they wanted to be close to DC, and obviously, as is demonstrated by your birth weight,
but after they've ruled out 4 other sites in Maryland,
however,
Baltimore, Prince George's County, College Park.
In just the past year, you have had nearly 100 businesses leave the county.
Oh, I agree.
And so, in this climate, what new business or business looking to relocate would choose this county?
So, Nicolee,
you have no transparency.
We got to
government
go on
here.
to our next topic, and you're talking about climate. Leads right directly into a great segue.
Yes.
Because Councilman Tom Hucker introduced a bill that would require landlords to put air conditioning, climate controlled, I might add, in all residential dwelling units, arguing that air conditioning is like heat. It's something that's required to make a dwelling habitable. Now, even New York City doesn't require air conditioning in all their rental units. And frankly, folks, we're not Phoenix, where it's going to be 120 each day. So, Mark, what's the deal?
Well, it's interesting that as recently as the 90s, about a third of the houses or dwellings in this country didn't have air conditioning, and that percentage has increased dramatically over the last 20, 30 years. What remains to be seen is how many units don't have air conditioning already, and that was one thing that Hucker wasn't able to answer. This is an example of governing by press release. They haven't even done the analysis to find out how many units don't have air conditioning.
All right, Nicolee, it's expensive to put in air conditioning.
Yes.
Central air conditioning costs between $3,000 and $15,000 for a house. And if you're putting in units in single apartments, that can be expensive. But also, it's expensive for the people renting the properties. It increases their bill $100 to $400
right.
per month.
Exactly.
Now, there is a paucity of housing, in affordable housing.
Yes.
And this is just going to drive housing even higher.
I couldn't agree with you more. This is the unaffordable care act of air conditioning. Humans have lived without air conditioning for millennia. And how is it that only right now in this century it's a fundamental human right? I don't think so. Now, exactly what you said to the affordability point. We need affordable housing. If you want a roof over your head and you only have a $500 budget, you would rather have that $500 apartment than something you can't afford that has air conditioning, right? Right. Now, so I am highly, highly opposed to this, but I will give one caveat. We have had in many places throughout the state, Baltimore area in particular, schools that were built in the 1960s and 70s that were not designed to have open windows and needed air conditioning. And here we were left with numerous buildings that had no working air conditioning, but no windows you could open. If you have that situation, clearly you need to air condition it. But aside from that, humans can live without air conditioning.
So if the council, Mike, were to go on this route, would it be possible for them to give tax credits to landlords to defray the capital costs involved with installing this stuff?
Certainly they could, but I think back to Mark's point, what's the magnitude of what we're trying to address in the first place? I mean, I think actually introducing legislation or putting this out and governing by press release and saying this is what we have to do on the verge of a heat wave is a great way to get your name in the paper, but I'm not sure it's necessarily a particularly great strategy to try and move the ball down the field. And so certainly if there's data that shows this is something we need to do and we have some idea as to what the cost is, that would be a reasonable strategy to put on the table if this is something we decide makes sense because we actually understand that. But there's a lot of work needs to go into that before we ever get there.
Thank you. Now, Cynthia, there's another aspect.
Yes.
The New York Times reports that the use of air conditioning is increasing pollution in the environment by releasing poisonous gases into the environment, which have a negative impact on the environment. And they're part of the greenhouse gases that trap heat and lead to depletion of the ozone layer. And they actually create more heat and the more demand for more air conditioning. So what's this county council who is so about the environment, who is so green, what are they going to do about this?
Well, it's the old air conditioning units that are still operating with Freon, and Freon will no longer be produced and supplied in the year 2020, which is coming right up. Since 2010, new air conditioning units are not using Freon as a cooling agent. They're using something called Puron, which does not affect the ozone layer. So if landlords are putting in new air conditioning units in apartment buildings in Montgomery County, they're not going to be contributing to the deterioration of the ozone layer because they don't use Freon anymore.
Except because they use electricity. Mark.
But they're going to use electricity. And what's interesting, in New York, the mayor has ordered this week, at the same thing we're talking about this, has ordered that the air conditioning be set at 79 degrees. And the reason for that is that New York State doesn't have enough electric capacity in order to support the air conditioning they already have.
So let me make another point. We have people in this county who live in 6,000, 8,000, 14,000 square foot houses that are cooling 16, 8, 10, 14,000 square foot houses. We're talking about people who may live in 600 square feet, who are elderly, who are poor, who can't get to cooling centers. And for them, air conditioning is essential.
Look,
it's wonderful to talk about.
I'm not arguing that there are people that desperately need air conditioning, but the question is, you have rational trade-offs and cost benefits between providing air conditioning and making it part of your right as a tenant to part of your habitability standards, and the cost, because those people who are struggling to pay $300 and $400 a month are now going to be having to pay $600 and $650 a month.
And that is why the chief advocate for the largest tenants advocacy organization in Montgomery County, Matt Losack, will have to be working with the county council to address this, to actually look at the magnitude of the problem and help them address the cost benefit and what it will mean as putting more burden on tenants as far as cost.
Yeah, I mean,
and he's willing and ready, you know, to have that conversation.
I'm sorry, but there's no way this does not push people out of the market and make them homeless. This takes you to California's problem with it's not affordable. Because we can talk about this all you want, but you're talking about a regulation. And who is left out in the cold in this situation? It's the poor mother with 2 kids who just needs a roof over her head.
And the elderly suffer when they are in un-air conditioned apartments.
Look, you're all right. You're both right, and it's a problem, and we're going to have to wait and see what'll come from this. But when we come back from this short break, why is the county executive unable to fill key top-level positions, including that of chief of police? And have you ever heard of the Maryland 400, the brave band of soldiers who saved the American Revolution almost before it got started? Stay tuned. Welcome back. Mike, last week County Executive Mark Elrich quietly ruled out acting police chief Marcus Jones out of the running for the permanent position. We know that another finalist, Antonio Duval, withdrew last week from consideration. And the remaining candidate, Tonya Chapman, has a controversial past, but she's being supported by Nancy Navarro, among others. And today we learned that Mark Elrich is going to nominate her for the chief of police position. Should he have done that in light of some of the more revealing things that have come out about the candidate Chapman, or should we start the process all over again?
Well, I don't know a lot about the candidate Chapman, but I think given the fact that you're down to two finalists and one is withdrawn, and I think given the fact that one of the criteria was that you had to be a chief of police in a city of more than 500, or jurisdiction of more than 500,000 people, and neither of them were, I think that really pointed to the fact that we've got to get somebody who actually understands the size and the magnitude of the department they're going to run. And I don't think either of those candidates had that capacity, and so I think I would have reopened it, because you've got to have, we have a jurisdiction of 1.1 million people. We have among the lowest crime rates of any jurisdiction that size in the country. We have to be an attractive place for somebody to want to work. There have been issues in the police department over the course of the last couple months that have come to light, but by and large, we have a very good and very effective police department, and we've got to get somebody in here who wants to do that.
And we got to keep it that way.
Exactly.
And I think that's the key. That's the key thing. And I think that's what's so disappointing was this is a first-class police force. It's nationally known as a first-class police force. Why weren't we getting better candidates applying? Is it because there's a bad political environment that exists right now in the county?
Well, it's not clear to me that we weren't getting better candidates applying. I'm not sure what the county executive or who the county executive selected from. And so I can't believe that if you've got our county in the mix that people aren't applying, but I'm not sure what the criteria was they were actually using to select people. It was fascinating. I talked to a couple of our police officers, and one of them said when he was a sergeant, he was commanding more people than either of the two finalists was commanding. And it's just saying that it's crazy to try and bring somebody from that kind of expertise in to try and run a 1,300 person department. And so I just don't think they're looking at the right criteria.
So Mark, there are those critics that say that Marcus Jones, the acting chief of police, was knocked out for being too pro-cop. Is that troubling?
Well, I think the county executive specifically said that he wasn't considering Jones because he was part of the Montgomery County Police Department. And I think that's extremely unfortunate that somebody wasn't being considered because of that. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if, fast forward a year or two, you're going to see Marcus Jones head of a police department somewhere else that's much larger than the candidates that we're considering, because he has a background and all the strengths that our police force had. I think you put your finger on the flaw. Somebody from inside the police force should have been considered.
Well, there's another flaw, and this is the reaction to the reaction, just like the laws of physics, is you knock out someone who has got a good reputation, that makes fewer and fewer people want to take the job. And so you are not getting the best people available to you. But also, Nicolee, there's an additional 9 other positions in this administration that are vacant. These are all high-paying positions. Why is this administration having such a hard time filling the vacancies?
That is a perplexing question. My goodness, this is Politics 101 of executive management. I'm not really quite sure how Elric got elected, because normally before you're even elected, you know who would be in these positions. And certainly between the time of you being elected and you starting office, the first person who is walking in with you the first day is your personnel person. Because let's be real, personnel is policy. You cannot implement your agenda unless you have smart, trained people who know what they're doing and share your vision. So I'm perplexed.
Well, we're going to leave it at that because we're going to go to our last topic. And then I'm going to go to ask Cynthia about asking her about the Maryland 400, who prevented the Continental Army from being overwhelmed by the British just 45 days after signing of the Declaration of Independence. Tell us about him.
Well, thanks to your encouragement, I now know about the Maryland 400. I must confess, I did not grow up in Maryland, so I'm going to use that as my excuse for not knowing about them. But it's a really impressive story. If you could call a loss the most important victory for the Revolutionary War, this was it, because this ragtag band of teenagers, who included the sons of wealthy merchants, enslaved men, free men, they fought to the death to keep the British from pursuing Washington. They saved General Washington and the Continental Army to go on to fight another day and to win the Revolutionary War.
Mark, we're going to wrap it up for us in the last 15 seconds, because you're from Brooklyn and you know about the Maryland 400.
Well, yes, and in this battle there's every year there's a commemoration of this battle at Greenwood Cemetery, and it commands quite a few people who come out and remember what was a very important step.
On August 27th is the...
August 27th.
And by surprise, right after the show, I'm going to interview the author of a new book all about the Maryland 400. So stay tuned for Parting Shots. And welcome back. As we went to break, I talked about the Maryland 400. And if you want to know more about the Maryland 400, be sure to tune in and watch my interview with Chris Formant, the author of Saving Washington, a story of heroism of the Maryland 400, who were instrumental in preventing George Washington and the Continental Army from being annihilated at the Battle of Brooklyn, the first and bloodiest battle of the Revolutionary War. You will not want to miss that show. Now with their own parting shots, Mark Uncapher.
In the category of dumb ideas is the dumb idea of County Executive Mark Elrich that one of the ways to pay for the Kirwan Commission, the increase in educational spending, is for the state to take on responsibility of selling and marijuana. Yes, that's just like what our Department of Liquor of DLC does. They would have government-owned marijuana.
Thank you, Mark. Nicolee Ambrose, your parting shot.
All right, I've just got two very exciting things to talk about of people doing the right thing. One is we were blessed to recently have the Reverend Dr. Elvita King visit Maryland for a Juneteenth tour of our state, where she visited 5 different events throughout the state, just bringing attention to Juneteenth and also 400 years of African Americans in America. It was a very exciting tour. And secondly, in DC, we have had Secretary of State Mike Pompeo host the second ministerial on religious freedom. And we've had over 1,000 people from 100 different countries that promote religious freedom here in the area recently. And it's just great seeing all these people do wonderful things and supporting the right thing.
Thank you, Nicolee. Cynthia Rubenstein, your parting shot.
Okay, I want to make a plug for the Washington Spirit, which is our local professional women's soccer team, which includes 2 World Cup caliber players, including Rose Lavelle, who made the incredible second goal in that World Cup winning game, as well as Mallory Pugh. This team plays at the Maryland Soccerplex in Boyd's, Maryland, right in Montgomery County, and also Audi Field, and they are only halfway through their season. So please get on their website, get tickets, and go to some of their games.
Thanks, Cynthia. Mike Knapp, your parting shot.
Well, education in Montgomery County is really important, and the University at Shady Grove has graduated more than 12,000 people with bachelor's degrees over the last 15 years, and we have 3,000 students that are taking classes there right now. Interestingly, the chair of our Planning, Housing and Economic Development Committee, Hans Riemer, called for us to actually have a new four-year institution in Montgomery County, and our county executive also called for us to have a new four-year institution in Montgomery County. And I just think it's really important for people to understand that the University of Shady Grove has been providing tremendous four-year degrees over the last 15 years and is going to do even more in the coming months, and we hope that they will actually recognize that soon.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you for being here tonight. I want to thank all of the panelists for giving up their Friday evening to be here to talk about Maryland politics and the things that are going here on in Montgomery County. And I appreciate the audience tuning in each and every week to Montgomery County's hardest hitting political talk show. For 21 this week, I'm Casey Aiken.